I had actually thought that my farming career down in the Cambridgeshire Fens had been a waste of time. I'd never really wanted to do it in the first place. And here I am with what I did during the 35 years of my farming career down in the Fens, and have it inform what we're doing now. Everything that I did then is informing what I do now. What I did then was flawed, totally wrong. I guess, I could say I did what I did, and I did it really well with the information I had at the time. But that information was flawed, and we were not actually looking after the land in the way that we thought we were. We were actually destroying the base asset. The land that I was farming had only been farmed for 100 years. It was, when my grandfather first walked on it, it was virgin marsh. It was right on the coast, in the Wash Basin on the east coast of England. It was creek country. It was like there was a lot of wildlife there. By the time I'd finished, by the time my father had finished, there wasn't one molecule of that original ecosystem left. And so you can say, well, we were looking after the land. No, I don't think so. We could kid ourselves that actually keeping a farm clean and tidy, and having lots of row crops or a beautifully ploughed land and everything in its place and where it should be. I had a very, very smart farming operation, but it wasn't anything to do with the natural world. And you could say that everything had to die in order for that farm, as it was when I left it, to become a reality. And you think, gosh, it's almost an ecosystem that is devoid of any other living things than the crops that we put into the ground in perfect rows, and to be perfectly clean, and to be fed chemical nitrogen, phosphate and potash, and thinking that actually we're doing the right thing. And then to come up here and realise, when we got in touch with all this stuff that we're talking about, I knew absolutely nothing about soil biology. Isn't that just awful? I'd been to agricultural college. They never taught it to me there. Nobody was worried about soil biology. We were in charge. We knew what to do. We could circumnavigate our way around nature and manipulate it and use it to our advantage. And my whole life was spent trying to stop the earth from doing what it most naturally wanted to do, which is grow grass and trees. If I didn't plough it and I didn't cultivate it, that's what would happen. And so, we're enslaved. The whole of our agriculture is enslaved to that end, which is keeping land clean. Land doesn't naturally want to be clean. If you leave a bit of earth bare for 6 months, it'll cover itself in weeds. Well, the pioneering plants that come up to start with. Well, that's the earth saying, I don't like being uncovered. I like being covered up. And I don't like being disturbed. So ploughing, it's the worst thing you can do to a piece of ground, is plough it. And yet that's what we love to do. And you can almost hear the worms shout when you turn a sod of soil over, saying, "Oh, just spent a whole year building that house of mine, and you're going to destroy it. I've got to start all over again." And you can put it in terms like that. It could be a good kid story, couldn't it? Good children's story. So I think we just need to recognise that nowhere in the natural world is there any bare soil other than where human beings have been. That sort of says it all, doesn't it? You know, it's like, go and look at the natural world and see what that looks like, and you see something that is perfectly organised, perfectly synchronised, every year delivers on time, never fails. There's always sunshine, there's always rain, trees always come into leaf, the flowers always come up, unless we go and interfere with it all. But it does it on its own, it doesn't need any help from us. And so if we have this wonderfully synchronised, perfect system, why would we want to go and do anything other than mimic it? So that's really what we're trying to do here.
Brought up in a tiny little village in Holland, on the countryside, with about 300 people, and a lot of farms, and worked as an e-learning developer for about 4 years before I decided to go travelling with my partner Dan. And we first went to New Zealand, lived in a van for a year, travelled around, and came back to Holland and decided that that wasn't it. So we did the same thing, bought a van and went travelling through the UK. Dan is from England. And after about 6 months in a van that was leaking in the winter, we decided to come to Scotland and have a wee break of our travelling and did a workaway. So that's a volunteer project on the Isle of Lismore. We got here in the first 2 weeks, so we didn't know there were any mountains around Lismore. It was hail, it was snow, it was rain, it was proper winter. We still slept in a leaking van, and after a while we had a bed inside Sarah York's house where we did our volunteer project with. I think living on an island, in the beginning I thought, wow, this is like back to, I don't know, when my dad was growing up. It feels like you're going back into time, because like doors are open here and people can just walk in and everyone knows everyone, and it feels like you're back to living in that small village that my dad used to talk about in his childhood, which I really liked. It was really corny, but I've lived in cities for quite a long time when I was growing up, and I've done all the partying and kind of got that out of my system, I guess. And what I really like here is the peace and quiet right now. And it maybe sounds really old, but there's so much. If I go out off the island and I go to a city like Glasgow or Edinburgh, I don't notice it, but when I'm there, I'm fine. And I come back here and I think, oh, wait a second. It's so hectic and there's so many distractions and so much that is thrown on your plate by cars and people and shops and commercials. And we don't have a TV where we are right now, which I never thought I would live without a TV, but it's so much better. We met Roger and Jilly at choir, I guess. That was a while back, and our paths kept crossing at choir and at all social events that you do on the island. And after a while they came to us with a proposition basically that they were getting a bit older and we were a bit younger. And they needed help on the farm and they needed someone to have the energy to do it all. So they talked to us about starting in farming and teaching us about holistic farm management, which basically means that you keep everything into perspective, everything that has to, not just your farm, but the ecosystem that lives on your farm, the land, the animals, the grass, the birds and the bees, and everything that is involved with farming. So that's how we got started with talking about what that entails, and they're teaching us about it. We went to a conference about holistic farm management, and it's definitely really interesting. The idea is that by creating a healthier soil, more carbon goes into the ground, so you're actually making a difference with climate change, you know, if we would all do it. And we were trying to do that here and lead by example, really. So far what we've done on the farm, well, there's a bunch of chickens living on the farm. We've got 8 cattle at the minute and I think 8 sheep as well. And Julie is a keen weaver, so she's got a lot of willow on the farm, which I've been cutting and sorting so far. Feeding the chickens, learning about chickens. I've recently killed and gutted my first chicken, which was quite an experience. But I think good to do. If you want to eat meat, you have to be able to do that as well, I think. We do a no-dig garden, which means there'll be no digging. The soil will just be left alone. You plant your seeds, you take the vegetables out, but you never dig the garden. We did a lot with getting more light into the garden by cutting a lot of trees down, which is sad, but useful for the garden. And basically getting ready for spring.
Things I like most about working down here it's just that I'm outside all the time, out in the fields with the animals, just by the sea, the amazing setting that we are fortunate enough to be working in, and just the freedom. It's not your average 9 to 5 lifestyle. It's something that is continuous. But it doesn't feel like a job. It's a lifestyle that I've been looking for a long time. I mean, as a builder, fixing windows and roofs is okay, but it's not something I want to be doing all week for the rest of my life. I like the island life because it's quite remote. It feels very remote in some sense. Despite it's only a 10-minute ferry ride across to Appin, but it's a very unique place to live, I think. I'd never found anywhere like this. The quietness and the relaxation of life. Sometimes it can be quite challenging. You have to be pretty well prepared for all things. This we learnt quite early on, when there was a storm and the boats didn't run for 3 days. And we thought, oh, we've got no food left in the cupboard. So that was quite an experience, but we learned from it. Just preparation. You have to be prepared for all things. Lack of coal or not having enough wood. You have to always be thinking ahead, which is not really a bad thing. I've always wanted to make a difference, and I've always struggled with knowing how to make a difference in the world, just doing my part. But I feel that this way is a good way to be doing it, because you can't change things on a big scale, you have to start with your own little patch, and this is a way to do that, just by thinking about how we're farming and the environment and the influence that we actually have on the land. We're going to be putting up a big water system, so that means that we will be able to have the animals all over the croft, because at the minute there's some high ground, or there's a lot of high ground that they can't get access to water, so the cows will have to come down from the hill to drink. There is a lot of potential for the land that we've got here, and it's going to be interesting, to what extent I don't know, but to explore the opportunities and utilise everything that we have, be it from the bay or to the bothy, even the track that runs down the side of the farm or through the farm, because that often gets a lot of walkers, with the meat sales. There's sort of no end of opportunity, which I think is very exciting.
I'd thought very definitely I didn't want to live on an island, and definitely we weren't going to have anything to do with farming, and I was definitely not going to be a dentist. And we're living on an island and farming, but I am definitely not a dentist anyway. And so we came here. First of all, we came and lived on the mainland, and this place, our lovely Sailean on the Isle of Lismore, came up very much by chance. I think the gods were looking after us, and we came and visited. And I have to say, when we arrived, even on an extremely wet day, I arrived at the top of the hill and looked down at the bay and thought, gosh, if there's a house down here, you know, we're going to be living here for the rest of our lives. And there was, and we are, but it needed everything doing, so we set about kind of rebuilding it from the inside out. And I remember saying to Roger, well, we're going to be growing our vegetables, aren't we? How do you do that? I've never really had time, because I was always working full-time. How do you do that? How do you feed soil? And although he'd been a farmer all his life, he said, do you know, I only really know how to get a great big container of NPK and be advised by an agronomist and work from there. And I thought, well, that's not the way we're going to go, because we're going to do this organically. And we started reading books about it and discovering, well, we've got this wonderful resource of seaweed, and thought, well, okay, we'll use that on the ground. And so I was immediately very involved in growing our food. When we came here, it was also the condition that if you have a croft, you need to have animals, and we didn't have any buildings to put any in, so they had to be ones that stayed out all year round. And so we got Highland cattle. And it's been a lovely journey with them, just discovering what characters they are. And so now we're farming in a small way, growing our own food and being able to have enough to sell on to other people. And then it became important, well, how do we make sure these animals stay healthy? How can we feed the ground to keep it healthy? So we looked into, well, maybe seaweed on the pasture would help it to grow better. Maybe we need some clover. And so we started this business of grazing it in a way that meant it didn't get overgrazed, and we added some dried, I think it's called calcified seaweed, and all of a sudden the clover appeared. So that whole seed bank was there. And when we very first got here, we were feeding in the winter time. We thought, well, you can buy these things called cattle rolls. They must be for cattle when they're hungry. And we were feeding them. And later on, we've discovered that, of course, they're made of grain. and it's adding carbohydrate to your cattle to keep them nourished over the winter. But all it does is it changes their gut flora, and it becomes unbalanced for eating grass. So in the springtime, when we stopped feeding cattle rolls, they would come to the point of their tummies didn't really work very well, and so they'd be eating grass again, and we wouldn't be feeding them cattle nuts, and they would scour, get diarrhoea, lose a bit of condition. It would take about 3 or 4 weeks before that all started going right again. So that was, gosh, I hadn't expected that. And talking to a local vet said, oh no, that's what happens. You really, the clue is in the name. They are herbivores, and they'd be best if they weren't fed grain. So the next year we cut our own hay. That was quite fun. We, with scythes, built up a good bit of muscle, and we fed the cattle hay over the winter as a supplement, and they didn't lose any condition, they didn't scour, it was easy for them to carry on straight onto grass again. So we realised, well, this was obviously a good thing. So we stopped being influenced by what everybody has done for seemingly so long, and started looking back at what was best for an animal. What would it be doing in the wild? And so all the time when we're looking at how we garden to grow vegetables, or how we grow animals, we're looking at how would nature do it. We had met Dan and Fika, and they've been amazing people in the community already, helping out. Yes, Dan will fix anything, and Fika's always very willing to come and help. And she noticed that I was struggling a bit with my arm, and came down, bless her, and came and wheeled wheelbarrows of seaweed and did the ironing and helped me round the house a little bit while I couldn't really move. I was so grateful. And it just seemed, Roger and I kind of looked at one another and said, well, what about these two? Shall we give them the opportunity and see if they would like it? And so we've been working together and working at, are we really wanting the same sort of things out of life? Do we knit together? Can we offer them something that they really want? We know what we want. We want to stay here, but we need some help. We've been using the holistic management model to work through that, working through, as I keep calling it, your life sentence, but it's your life statement. Working out, first of all, personally, what it is that you would like to achieve, and then working it out as a couple, and then working the two couples together, and seeing how we'd like to go forwards. And that's an ongoing process. So we're constantly making sure that we're taking care of one another and not assuming anything and not being ungenerous with one another, because a partnership like this is worth cherishing. I think it'll be good for all of us.